Imagine living next door to a mass murderer. Your kids play in his yard. He organizes block parties. He dresses as a clown and makes children laugh at birthday parties. He seems like the perfect neighbor. Now imagine discovering that beneath his house, just feet from where your children played, 29 bodies are buried in shallow graves. Some have been there for years. The smell you complained about? That wasn't moisture in his crawl space. That was death. This isn't a horror movie. This is the true story of John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, a pillar of his community who shook hands with the First Lady, who threw elaborate neighborhood parties, who smiled for the cameras. And beneath that smile, beneath his house, he was hiding one of the most horrific killing sprees in American history. 33 young men and boys, tortured, murdered, and buried like garbage. Today, we're uncovering the truth about the monster who hid behind a clown's makeup.
December 22, 1978, Des Plaines, Illinois. A quiet suburban street outside Chicago has transformed into a scene from a nightmare. News cameras capture investigators in hazmat suits emerging from a modest ranch house at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue. They're carrying body bags, one after another after another. Inside the crawl space beneath this ordinary-looking home, detectives are uncovering what will become one of the most horrific crime scenes in American history. The stench is overwhelming, a mixture of death, decay, and lime. As they dig through the dirt, skeletal remains emerge from shallow graves. Some bodies are stacked on top of each other. Some are missing heads. Some have been there for years.
By the time the excavation is complete, 29 bodies will be pulled from this property. 4 more will be recovered from the nearby Des Plaines River. 33 young men and boys murdered by one man. A man the neighborhood knew as a friendly contractor and community volunteer. A man who dressed as Pogo the Clown to entertain sick children at hospitals. John Wayne Gacy raped, tortured, and murdered at least 33 young men and boys between 1972 and 1978. This is the story of the killer clown and how a determined mother's refusal to accept that her son had simply run away finally brought him to justice. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois. To understand the monster he became, one must first understand the man he pretended to be. Because John Wayne Gacy lived 2 lives so completely separate that even those closest to him never suspected the horror hidden beneath his floorboards. By the mid-1970s, Gacy had built an impressive facade. He owned PDM Contractors, a successful construction company that employed numerous teenage boys. He was active in the Democratic Party, serving as a precinct captain in Norwood Park Township. He organized elaborate street parties for his neighborhood, complete with fireworks and food for hundreds of people. He dressed as Pogo the Clown, complete with painted face and colorful costume, to visit children's hospitals and perform at charity events. He even had his photograph taken with First Lady Rosalind Carter at a political event, proudly wearing his S security clearance pin. To his neighbors, Gacy was gregarious, helpful, and generous. He was married to his second wife, Carol, and played the role of devoted stepfather. He seemed to know everyone in the community, from politicians to police officers. When local events needed organizing, Gacy was often the first to volunteer. Lily Grexa, one of his neighbors, would later describe him as wonderful, someone who always had a smile on his face. But beneath this carefully constructed persona lurked something dark and predatory. Gacy had been convicted in 1968 of sodomy involving a teenage boy in Waterloo, Iowa, and was sentenced to 10 years in prison, though he served only 18 months. The psychiatric evaluation from that case revealed something chilling. Gacy had a total denial of responsibility for his actions, could produce an alibi for everything, and blamed others who were out to get him. Upon his release in 1970, he moved back to Chicago and began rebuilding his life. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. What they didn't know was that Gacy was already planning his next crimes. On January 3rd, 1972, Gacy met 16-year-old Timothy McCoy at the Greyhound bus station in Chicago. The teenager had a layover on his way home to Nebraska, and Gacy offered him a place to stay for the night. Timothy agreed. He would never see his family again. Gacy fatally stabbed him in the chest. When investigators later examined Gacy's bedroom, they found a large blood stain on the underside of the carpet. Timothy McCoy would be identified years later through his distinctive teeth as Gacy's first known victim, buried in the crawl space beneath what would become a mass grave. But the murder of Timothy McCoy was just the beginning. Between 1972 and early 1976, Gacy killed at least 2 more victims, moving slowly and cautiously. Then, in 1976, after divorcing his second wife, Carol, the pace of murders accelerated dramatically. It was as if a restraint had been removed and the monster could finally feed without constraint. In 1976 alone, at least 14 victims were murdered. Gacy's crimes typically followed a pattern. He would lure victims to his house, sometimes offering a job at his construction company, promising $5 an hour, nearly double what most teenagers earned. Other times he would pose as a police officer, complete with a fake badge. He preyed on vulnerability, runaways, drifters, male prostitutes, teenagers looking for construction work, people society often overlooked, whose disappearances might not immediately trigger alarm bells. Many of his victims were his own employees or applicants for jobs at PDM contractors. 17-year-old Gregory Godzik worked for Gacy and disappeared on December 11, 1976, after telling his girlfriend he was going on a date. When she went to Gacy's house to ask about him, Gacy told her Gregory had said he was running away. His body was later found in the crawl space. 18-year-old John Butkovich had also worked for Gacy before disappearing on July 31, 1975, the same day he went to Gacy's house to demand his final paycheck. His body was found beneath the garage floor, encased in concrete. What happened once these young men entered Gacy's home was methodical and horrifying. The house at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue was unremarkable from the outside, a simple ranch-style home with a semicircle driveway and an oversized garage in the back. But inside, it was a chamber of horrors. Gacy had refined his method to a chilling degree of efficiency. Once he had lured a victim inside with promises of work or money, he would offer them drinks laced with drugs or alcohol. He would engage them in conversation, put them at ease, gain their trust. Then he would suggest demonstrating a magic trick involving handcuffs. The trick was simple. Put on the handcuffs, and Gacy would show them how to escape. Most victims, relaxed and unsuspecting, agreed. The moment the handcuffs clicked shut, their fate was sealed. Multiple former employees who survived their encounters with Gacy would later testify that he had repeatedly asked them to be handcuffed under this same pretext. What followed was torture. Gacy would rape his captive and then murder them by either strangulation or asphyxiation with a garrote. He had constructed what he called his rope trick, a tourniquet device made of rope with a wooden handle or pipe that could be twisted to slowly strangle his victims. The process was agonizingly slow, sometimes taking hours. Gacy would place the rope around the victim's neck, insert the wooden handle, and twist, twist, twist. After the murder of one victim around January 1974, bodily fluids leaped from the victim's mouth and nose, staining Gacy's carpet. Because of this incident, Gacy began stuffing rags, the victim's own underwear or socks, deep into the mouths of subsequent victims to prevent such leakage. When Frank Landingen's body was discovered in the Des Plaines River, investigators found underwear stuffed in his mouth. He had died from strangulation, not drowning.
After killing his victims, Gacy faced the problem of disposal. Initially, he buried bodies in the crawl space beneath his house, a narrow, dirt-floored area accessible through a trap door in a closet. He would dig shallow graves, sometimes stacking bodies on top of one another when space became limited. He spread lime over the graves to accelerate decomposition and mask the smell, but the smell persisted. Neighbors complained. Gacy told them it was moisture problems in the crawl space. Throughout 1976, the murders accelerated at an alarming rate. On August 5, 1976, 16-year-old James Hawkinson made his last call to his family, possibly from Gacy's home. The accomplished diver and gymnast from Minnesota was never seen alive again. His body was buried in the crawl space. His mother came to Chicago in 1979 after Gacy's arrest, desperately trying to find out if her son was among the victims. But she didn't have his dental records, then the main method of identifying remains, so she left without answers. It wasn't until 2017, through DNA testing, that James Hawkinson was finally identified. On August 6, 1976, 17-year-old Michael Bonin, a high school student from Bensonville, was dropped off at the Aragon Ballroom by his mother to attend a concert. He never came home. His body was confirmed through dental records on January 1, 1979. In October 1976, William George Bundy, an accomplished diver and gymnast at Senn High School, told his family he was heading to a party. They noticed he left his wallet behind, unusual for someone going out. He vanished. For 35 years, his final destination remained unknown until DNA testing confirmed he was one of Gacy's victims. Investigators believe Bundy may have worked for Gacy, though that was never confirmed. On October 24, 1976, two friends, 14-year-old Michael Marino and 16-year-old Kenneth Parker, were last seen near a restaurant at Clark Street and Diversey Parkway, an intersection where Gacy picked up many of his victims. Investigators believe the friends were killed at the same time because they shared a common grave under Gacy's house, their bodies found side by side. Some victims came from families already devastated by tragedy. John Mowry, a 19-year-old Marine who disappeared in September 1977, had a sister who had been murdered 5 years earlier in 1972 in an unrelated incident. The family endured multiple unspeakable tragedies. Randy Reffett, who went missing in May 1976, came from a family involved in a domestic altercation in Kentucky that resulted in both his father and mother being shot and nearly killed. Many of these families were dealing with alcoholism, abuse, and other violent acts when their sons disappeared. On November 11, 1977, 16-year-old Robert Winch disappeared. A week later, on November 18th, 20-year-old Tommy Bowling Jr., a young father with a 3-year-old son, vanished. Both were using drugs at the time of their disappearances. Their remains were found side by side in the center of the crawl space, ligatures still around their necks. By mid-1978, the crawl space had reached capacity. 26 bodies were crammed into the narrow space beneath Gacy's home. He could fit no more. Gacy later confessed to police that he considered stowing bodies in his attic, but was worried about complications from leakage. So he chose a different solution, the Des Plaines River. Gacy stated he had thrown 5 bodies into the Des Plaines River in 1978 from the I-55 bridge. But disposing of bodies in the river was risky. It was only a matter of time before one washed shore, triggering an investigation. The walls were closing in.
Then, on December 11, 1978, John Wayne Gacy made his final, fatal mistake. Robert Jerome Peist was 15 years old, a sophomore at Maine West High School in Des Plaines, an honor student with his whole life ahead of him. On the evening of December 11, 1978, he was working his part-time job at Neeson Pharmacy, earning $2.85 an hour as a stockboy. That afternoon, Gacy visited the Neeson Pharmacy to discuss a potential remodeling deal with the store owner, Phil Torf. While within earshot of Robert Peist, Gacy casually mentioned his firm often hired teenage boys at a starting wage of $5 per hour, almost double the pay Peist earned at the pharmacy. It was Robert's mother's 46th birthday, and Elizabeth Peist arrived at the pharmacy around 9 p.m. to pick up her son and bring him home for a family celebration. But Robert asked her to wait. "Some contractor wants to talk to me about a job," he told her, promising to return in just a few minutes. Robert walked out of the pharmacy at 9 p.m. He never walked back in. When 10 minutes passed without his return, Robert's co-worker, Kim Byers, went outside to look for him. Elizabeth Peist also searched. They found nothing but footprints and tire tracks in the ice and snow. Robert Peist had vanished. But unlike many of Gacy's previous victims, runaways, drifters, young men whose disappearances might be dismissed, Robert Peist came from a stable, loving family. His parents immediately called the police. They refused to accept suggestions that their honor student's son had simply run away. And they had a crucial piece of information. Robert had gone to speak with a contractor about a job. Des Plaines Police Lieutenant Joe Kozenchek, whose own son attended the same high school as Robert, took charge of the investigation. He had been chief of detectives for only 6 months, a self-described neophyte, but his instincts told him this case was urgent. Within hours, police identified the contractor as John Wayne Gacy. By December 12th, less than 24 hours after Robert's disappearance, police were at Gacy's door. Gacy admitted to authorities that he'd been at Neeson Pharmacy the previous evening, but denied that he'd spoken to Robert. But investigators weren't satisfied. They began digging into Gacy's background and quickly discovered disturbing information. He had a previous conviction for sodomy of a teenage boy in Iowa. On December 13, 1978, police obtained a search warrant for Gacy's home and arrived with the keys Gacy had reluctantly provided. The search revealed several suspicious items: multiple police badges, a starting pistol, handcuffs, books about homosexuality and pederasty, pornographic films, capsules of amyl nitrite, a dildo, a 2x4 with 2 holes drilled into each end, bottles of Valium, several driver's licenses belonging to other people, and underwear too small to fit Gacy. Critically, they found 2 items that directly connected Gacy to Robert. They found a receipt for a roll of film that belonged to Kim Byers, Robert's co-worker at Neeson Pharmacy, who had borrowed Robert's coat during their shift and tucked the receipt in the pocket. The coat was found at Gacy's house. They also found a class ring with the initials JAS. It belonged to John Schick, a 19-year-old who had disappeared in January 1977. Police were now connecting dots to multiple missing persons cases. Additional items in the house belonged to other missing young men: a brown suede jacket belonging to victim John Mowery, a white metal buckle with a brown stone belonging to Robert Winch, and various other personal effects. But they didn't yet know about the bodies beneath the house. The crawl space remained undiscovered. Police placed Gacy under 24-hour surveillance while they continued investigating. For the next week, Gacy was followed everywhere by Des Plaines police officers Mike Albrecht and David Hochmeister. Gacy seemed to enjoy the cat-and-mouse game. He repeatedly denied involvement with Peist's disappearance and accused the officers of harassing him because of his political connections. He openly taunted the surveillance officers by flouting traffic laws and succeeded in losing his pursuers more than once. He regularly invited the detectives to join him for meals in restaurants and occasionally for drinks in bars or at his home. He was charming, personable, confident. But behind his bravado, Gacy was panicking. On December 12th, the day after Piest's disappearance, Gacy had retrieved Robert's body from his attic where he'd temporarily hidden it, placed it in the trunk of his car, and dumped it in the Des Plaines River under cover of darkness. In the early morning hours, at 2 a.m., Gacy's car had been towed out of a snowbank on the Tri-State Tollway north of Ogden Avenue, about 38 miles north of where he would later confess to dumping Piest's body. Records from the tow truck company would help authorities determine within an hour the time Gacy disposed of the body. At 3:20 a.m. on December 13th, Gacy walked into the Des Plaines police station with mud on his pants and shoes. He asked to speak with Lieutenant Kozenchak, but was told to come back later. He did return and gave officers a brief statement. As the surveillance continued, more evidence emerged. Employees told police about digging trenches in Gacy's crawlspace and spreading lime there. Other young men came forward with stories of being assaulted by Gacy, but surviving. One man, Jeffrey Rignall, described being kidnapped in March 1978, drugged with chloroform, and tortured for hours in Gacy's house before being dumped in Lincoln Park, barely alive. The investigation was closing in. Gacy's behavior became increasingly erratic. He wasn't sleeping, he was making mistakes, and he knew it was over. On December 20, 1978, John Wayne Gacy spent the evening with his lawyer, Sam Amarante. With surveillance officers Mike Albrecht and Dave Hockmeister waiting outside, Gacy confessed everything. He told Amarante he had killed multiple people, maybe 30, he said. The next day, December 21st, 1978, police arrested Gacy outside a McDonald's in Niles, Illinois, on a minor drug charge. He had been seen passing marijuana to a gas station attendant. But the real reason for the arrest was to get him into custody while they obtained another search warrant. With Gacy behind bars, investigators returned to his home with authority to tear it apart if necessary. This time, they were looking for bodies. Officers discovered the trapdoor in the closet leading to the crawl space. When they descended into the narrow space beneath the house with flashlights, the smell was overwhelming. One officer, Bob Schultz, had been in Gacy's bathroom days earlier when the furnace kicked on. The heat had carried a distinctive smell up from the crawl space, a smell he recognized as death. Now, in the crawl space itself, that smell was overpowering. As investigators began digging through the lime-covered dirt, they quickly found what they were looking for: human remains, skeletal bones, pieces of clothing, evidence of multiple bodies in various states of decomposition. In custody, Gacy gave a rambling verbal statement lasting several hours. In the early morning hours of December 22, in the presence of his lawyers, Gacy provided a formal confession. He told police he had killed approximately 30 young males after having sexual relations with them. He talked about himself in the third person, saying the slayings and sex acts were committed by Jack or John, as if trying to distance himself from his own actions. He drew a rough diagram showing where bodies were buried in his basement and gave the names of 6 of his victims. He stated he had buried the bodies of 27 victims on his property, most in the crawl space. 5 other bodies, including Robert Piest's, were thrown into rivers south of Chicago. On December 23rd, accompanied by police, his lawyers, and his older sister, Gacy was driven to the I-55 bridge to pinpoint the precise spot where he confessed to having thrown Robert Piest and 4 other victims into the river. He then was taken to his house and instructed to mark his garage floor with orange spray paint to show where he had buried John Butkovich, the only victim he claimed to have killed in self-defense. Back at the house, the excavation continued for days. News cameras broadcast live footage around the clock as body after body was removed from the property. Sheriff's officers carried remains to the county morgue in a grim procession that seemed endless. 26 bodies were unearthed from Gacy's crawl space over the following week. 3 others were also unearthed elsewhere on his property, one beneath the garage floor in concrete, others in other locations. The house was completely dismantled, floorboards torn up, walls removed, the entire property systematically destroyed in the search for evidence. In total, 29 bodies were recovered from 8213 West Summerdale Avenue. Police guarded the site as hundreds of people drove or walked by, drawn by morbid curiosity and horror. Papers, wallets, and other property of missing Chicago area youths were found inside the house. Parents of missing boys, some from as far away as London, called in desperate efforts to learn the identity of the victims. The identifications began immediately. Dental records were crucial. Some victims were identified quickly. Teenagers reported missing by their families years earlier. But many identifications took longer. Some victims had never been reported missing, runaways whose families didn't know they were gone or had given up searching. Some families were estranged from their murdered relative and were unaware they were missing. On April 9, 1979, nearly 4 months after his disappearance, Robert Piest's body was finally discovered in the Des Plaines River. Dental records and x-rays confirmed his identity. His funeral was held on April 18, 1979. His mother, Elizabeth, who had refused to believe her son had run away, who had pushed police to investigate, who had kept the case in the spotlight, she finally had closure. But it came at an unbearable price. By the time the investigation concluded, 33 victims had been confirmed. 5 of Gacy's victims remain unidentified to this day, known only by numbers assigned during the investigation. Modern DNA technology and genetic genealogy have helped identify some victims in recent years. Francis Wayne Alexander was identified in 2021, James Hackinson in 2017, William Bundy in 2011, but others remain nameless, lost young men whose families may never know what happened to them. John Wayne Gacy was brought to trial on February 6, 1980, charged with 33 murders. Since by the time the trial began, Gacy had given 3 confessions to police and had told them where to find the bodies, the question of whether he had committed the killings was not an issue. Instead, the trial focused entirely on one question: was John Wayne Gacy legally insane at the time of the crimes? Due to extraordinary media interest, this was, after all, the largest serial murder case in American history. The defense requested a change of venue from Cook County. Judge Louis B. Garipro ruled that the jury of 12 regular jurors and 2 alternates would be chosen in Rockford and sequestered in Chicago for the trial. This saved Cook County the expense of moving prosecutors, defense attorneys, court personnel, and witnesses for what was expected to be a lengthy and costly trial. Due to the graphic nature of the testimony and evidence to be presented, Judge Garippo banned anyone younger than 16 years old from the courtroom. The courtroom was packed daily with spectators, media, and family members of victims. Opening statements were delivered on February 6, 1980. The prosecution argued that Gacy was an entirely sane, calculating, cold-blooded killer who had meticulously planned and executed his crimes. The defense team tried to convince the jury that Gacy was mentally disturbed, possibly as a result of physical abuse by his father during his childhood, and that he was schizophrenic or suffered from multiple personality disorder. During 13 days of testimony, the prosecution questioned 60 witnesses. They began with frequently emotional accounts from relatives and friends of the victims. One woman fainted after being shown her murdered 14-year-old son's bracelet. The testimony was devastating. Family after family took the stand to describe their lost sons. Boys with bright futures, young men with dreams, all stolen by the man sitting calmly in the courtroom. Former employees of Gacy testified that they had to frequently rebuff his sexual advances and attempts to persuade them to be handcuffed on the pretext of demonstrating a conjuring trick. the same ploy Gacy had used to disable many of his victims. Michael Rossi, who had worked for Gacy, testified about being offered $3 an hour with guaranteed 40 hours a week. He identified Gacy in the courtroom, pointing to the man in the blue suit. Police officers involved in the investigation and forensic experts testified to the circumstances and condition of the bodies recovered and to the cause of death. The medical examiner explained in clinical detail how several victims had been strangled or suffocated using Gacy's rope trick, the tourniquet method with the wooden handle. Other prosecution witnesses discussed Gacy's confession, in which he described his methods. The flooring from Gacy's house, including the trap door used to enter the crawl space, was set up as a state exhibit in the courtroom. It remained there for the rest of the trial, a constant physical reminder of the horror that had taken place beneath that house. The prosecution also brought psychologists as expert witnesses who testified that Gacy was sane at the time of the killings and had a personality disorder, but had not experienced moments of temporary insanity. One expert said that constructing a crawl space to bury bodies was clear evidence of planning and premeditation. The defense began its case on February 21st. Their first witness was Jeffrey Rignall, a surviving victim of Gacy's attack. The defense attorneys hoped that Rignall's description of his experiences would help convince the jurors that Gacy was insane and not in control of his actions. Rignall described having been picked up by Gacy in his car and then rendered unconscious with chloroform. When he regained consciousness, he was repeatedly raped and sadistically tortured over a period of several hours before being dumped unconscious in Lincoln Park. Rignall had been so traumatized by his experience that he became hysterical on the witness stand, began to vomit, and eventually had to be removed from the courtroom. It was one of the most dramatic moments of the trial. The defense called psychiatrists who had interviewed Gacy prior to trial. Dr. Richard Rappaport testified that Gacy suffered from a mixed psychosis and projected his repressed parts onto others, whom he then enraged against. Dr. Helen Morrison testified that Gacy had been suffering from psychosis since at least 1958. Dr. Robert Traisman described Gacy as suffering from homosexual conflicts, marked feelings of masculine inadequacy, sexual confusion, lack of empathy, alarming lack of emotional control under stress, and a strong potential for emotional disintegration and expressions of hostile, dangerous impulses. Others testified about Gacy's positive contributions to the community. Lily Grexa, his neighbor, took the stand and told of how wonderful a neighbor he was, always generous, always helpful, always with a smile on his face. However, Mrs. Grexa refused to say that he was crazy. Instead, she said she believed Gacy to be a very brilliant man. That statement would prove damaging to the defense's case, as it conflicted with the story that Gacy was unable to control his actions and was insane. But the prosecution's rebuttal was devastating. Prosecutor William Kunkel asked one defense expert witness if he could guarantee Gacy would spend the rest of his life in a mental institution if found not guilty by reason of insanity. The doctor answered honestly, "Absolutely impossible. We find it very difficult to keep people in hospitals who in fact need to be there because of concern, which I can understand, that to hospitalize is a deprivation of civil rights." That answer changed everything. The jury now understood that an insanity verdict might mean Gacy could someday be released. Closing arguments were heard on March 11, 1980. The prosecution reviewed in gruesome detail each of the murders with which Gacy was charged, emphasizing that they were all carefully planned and deliberately carried out. The defense again attempted to convince the jury that a finding of insanity was appropriate. They even suggested that he was not found insane, a unique opportunity might be missed for studying the mind of the serial killer, from which lessons might be learned to help prevent the repetition of such crimes. Then came prosecutor William Kunkel's final statement, a moment that would be remembered as one of the most powerful closing arguments in American legal history. He took victims' photos off a display board as he spoke, one by one.
his voice rising with emotion. He said, "You show him the same mercy he showed when he took these innocent lives off the face of the earth and put them here." He emphatically threw the photographs into the crawl-space trapdoor exhibit still set up in the courtroom. The impact was visceral. The courtroom fell silent.
The case went to the jury of 7 men and 5 women on March 12, 1980. They deliberated for 1 hour and 50 minutes before returning to the courtroom. The silence was absolute as everyone stood. The court clerk read the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, John Wayne Gacy, guilty. Guilty on all 33 counts of murder." At the time, this gave Gacy the singular notoriety of having been convicted of more murders than anyone else in American history. The following day, the same jury was asked to consider the sentence. After deliberating for 2 hours and 15 minutes, they sentenced John Wayne Gacy to death.
Gacy was transferred to Menard Correctional Center, where he remained on death row for 14 years, repeatedly proclaiming his innocence through often conflicting claims. He filed numerous appeals, each one denied. The Supreme Court of Illinois upheld his conviction in 1984. The United States Supreme Court denied his appeals multiple times. While imprisoned, Gacy took up oil painting, creating disturbing images, including multiple self-portraits as Pogo the Clown. These paintings would later be sold at auction, some fetching thousands of dollars from collectors fascinated by murderabilia, a fact that disgusted victims' families. Gacy gave interviews to journalists and FBI agents, sometimes hinting at additional victims police had never discovered. When Detective Raphael Tovar asked if there were more victims, Gacy replied cryptically, "That's for you guys to find out." He maintained various versions of his story, sometimes claiming innocence, sometimes admitting to killings but blaming his alter ego, Jack, sometimes providing new details about crimes. After exhausting all appeals, the Illinois Supreme Court formally set an execution date, May 10, 1994.
On the evening of May 9, 1994, Gacy was transferred to Stateville Correctional Center to be executed. His last meal was fried chicken, butterfly shrimp, French fries, fresh strawberries, and a Coca-Cola. A mundane final request for a man who had committed such monstrous acts. On May 10, 1994, at approximately 12:40 a.m., John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection. He was 52 years old. In his final statement, Gacy proclaimed his innocence one last time, saying, "Kiss my ass." Outside the prison, crowds had gathered, hundreds of people waiting for news of the execution. When it was announced that Gacy was dead, many cheered. Some set off fireworks. Others held signs reading, "No tears for the clown." Family members of victims attended, seeking closure after years of anguish and pain. But for many families, true closure remained elusive. The case of John Wayne Gacy fundamentally changed how America understood serial killers. He shattered the stereotype of the antisocial loner lurking in shadows. Gacy was gregarious, successful, and deeply embedded in his community. He hid in plain sight, protected by his respectable facade and his political connections. He proved that monsters don't always look like monsters. The investigation also exposed systemic failures. Gacy had been mentioned in several missing persons reports, but never as a serious suspect. Multiple young men had reported assaults by Gacy to police over the years, but he was never seriously investigated. Young men, particularly those from vulnerable populations like runaways and male prostitutes, disappeared, and their cases weren't prioritized. Had investigators connected the dots earlier, lives could have been saved.
The Gacy case led to significant changes in how law enforcement handles missing persons cases and serial murder investigations. It emphasized the importance of interjurisdictional cooperation, the need to take all disappearances seriously, regardless of the victim's background, and the value of persistent family members who refuse to accept that their loved ones simply ran away. Today, efforts continue to identify Gacy's remaining unknown victims. The Cook County Sheriff's Office, under Sheriff Tom Dart, reopened the investigation in 2011 to identify the 5 remaining unnamed victims using modern DNA technology and genetic genealogy. Through these efforts, Francis Wayne Alexander was identified in 2021, James Hawkinson in 2017, and William Bundy in 2011. DNA Doe Project and other organizations continue working to give names to the nameless, to reunite remains with families who never stopped searching.
The house at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue was demolished in April 1979. The lot remained vacant for years, a haunted, empty space that nobody wanted to touch. Eventually, a new home was built there, but the address was changed to erase the connection to horror. John Wayne Gacy murdered at least 33 young men and boys. He destroyed countless families. He exploited society's most vulnerable members, and he did it all while wearing the mask of a pillar of the community, and sometimes, quite literally, the face of a clown. The killer clown is dead, but the lessons from his crimes about the nature of evil, the importance of believing victims, and the need to protect the vulnerable remain as relevant today as they were in 1978. And 5 young men still wait for someone to give them back their names.